pleasure to be here today to help facilitate this conversation. Unfortunately, it's not the debate that Hugo promised in the first session this morning. As much as we would like to host a debate, I don't think I would necessarily be comfortable to moderate that debate. However, this will be a friendly...
It would abide by IHF.
It would. A friendly and frank discussion between some leading experts on the topic of localization and complementarity. Now, this is a topic that's very close to my heart in my work for ICVA, which is a global network of NGOs supporting humanitarian action. And ICVA is made up of national, regional, and international NGOs and NGO networks. So we, more often than many other networks, I think, discuss these topics in great detail. They're not always easy discussions to have. With a diverse membership comes a lot of diverse views and perspectives. And we, as a network, and our member NGOs and our partners, really find that we need to interrogate these topics more and more. So it's great to have a chance to do this today, to get into a little bit more depth into the topics of localization, and particularly of complementarity, as we'll discuss today. Before we start, a little spot quiz around the room. Who thinks they could comfortably, if they were asked to come up the front now, define what localization means in the context of their work? Just raise your hands. I won't ask you to come up. I just would like you to see if you think you could just... 4.5 hands in the room. Okay. All right. Excellent. That's a good starting point. What about complementarity? Who thinks they could come up here and explain what complementarity actually means to them in their work today? Couple more, excellent, and maybe Hugo, which is nice. So okay, that's quite interesting, and that's I guess good for our panelists to keep in mind when we're talking about these. These issues are not necessarily easily defined and or well understood. Although we've been talking about localization, particularly for 3 years to the day since the WHS, as I was reminded this morning. It was 3 years ago today that many of us were in Istanbul having these very important big global discussions, and localization was front and center throughout. So it's worth keeping that in mind as well as we discuss today. 3 years later, here we are in Melbourne, but where are we in terms of localization in a global world? And I've just been reflecting, and I woke up this morning to scribble notes, which I can't read anymore, about how these topics were addressed over the past 3 days here. Not always directly, but we've talked about a number of these, the related issues of context, capacity, prepositioning capacity, expectations, evidence, good intentions, humility, subsidization, transfer of risk, of building swift trust. Ecosystems, not all agreed that ecosystems was an appropriate word, but it was used in this context. Diverse perspectives from different positions, aligning visions, shared risk, and the way things are done here. We talked about this morning about accompaniment, big and small, colonial legacies, new deals, influence, solidarity, and ethics. And of course, in nearly every session, we've talked about leadership, being that this is a conference on leadership. And I like the idea of leadership about others and about not leading at all sometimes, as Hugo mentioned this morning. All of these are central in my understanding of what localization and complementarity means, and I think all of these areas have added a richness to I hope what is a very rich discussion today. So now our panelists are going to take us a little bit further into our localization journey, and I think localization is a journey, not a destination. That may be a personal opinion. I think that every discussion we have on this topic helps us maybe navigate the road a little bit further, and certainly our 3 panelists this morning will help us to do that. Looking at particularly the opportunities and challenges in different settings, how localization is taking shape for different organisations in the real world. And we're taking the much beloved pracademic approach. We have practitioners, we have research that their organisations have been undertaking, and we're bringing that all together for you here today. I hope the discussions will motivate some new ideas, how you can take these ideas back to your own context, and what you might do within your organisations, within your academic practice, within your communities to actually carry forward some of these ideas around what localisation and complementarity means for your work and in the future. Enough from me. Now, please allow me to invite to the podium our three fantastic panellists. We've agreed to skip the formalities in order to keep things nice and succinct. So, firstly, Judy Slatyer from Australian Red Cross, Degan Ali from Adeso and the NEAR Network, and Dr. Hugo Slim from ICRC. Thank you. We've asked each of our panellists to give a short introductory presentation, just to share some reflections and thoughts from their perspective on what localization and complementarity means. Then we're going to go straight into Q&A. We saw this morning how many hands were raised, and there's obviously a lot of interest in discussion. This is not a lecture. This is a dialogue. Share opinions, challenge the panellists, challenge my perspectives. I hope you will. So without further ado, Judy, would you please take us away?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I actually use the podium?
Absolutely.
And I'm not juggling too many things. Hello, everybody. It's so good to be here and fantastic this morning, Hugo. Thank you. It's always, I think leadership is about constant learning and reminding, and it's always good to have those sorts of discussions. And thank you, Jeremy. Where about you've gone? So we have a wonderful, wonderful thing in Australia where we can learn about what locally led means from the Indigenous folks of Australia who have been locally led through their ceremony of the Welcome to Country and other practices for 60,000 years. Because Welcome to Country is a really fundamental custom of first of all, acceptance in the country. Secondly, listening, talking, understanding each other. Thirdly, sharing what's around. You know, this is where the resources are. This is where the issues are. It's about a learning of joint customs and practices, and it's about agreed processes for conflict resolution before you even get in the door, or across the border, or across the river. So these local customs that have been part of Australia for 60,000 years, unfortunately, in the last 200, completely disrupted, but they give us a great basis on which to go back to. So to being locally led, I think we have a pretty good idea of what it is. You'll note I do not call it localisation. I find that word very degrading. It's about bestowing something. This is not what about locally led. Locally led is genuinely locally led to us. So let's talk about what we do know. We know that after 9 earthquakes in Indonesia, the Indonesians did a tremendous job of saying to the international community, hold, just hold. We'll work through what's needed, and then we'll work through where you can best help us. And I call that complementarity. It's really simple, really straightforward. And then when you most need us, what we most need from you, that's what you can help us with. Fantastic. It was really clear. We knew at Red Cross what was needed. We said, here it is. Over to you to help us lead it. We know that community and local authorities are both far and away the best to respond to natural disasters. Their knowledge, their communities, their values, their existing social connections, their ingenuity, their ideas. We know that technology is increasingly allowing people and communities to predict, to prepare for, to have self-agency over what they do in times of crisis, and to have control in the middle of the worst times in their lives. We know that world-leading technologies of big data, artificial intelligence, distributed ledgers, 3D printing can bring whole new and good dimensions to what we do in humanitarian work. Even here, Degan University, their trial in one country of using 3D printing to make printer ribbons out of the rubbish, the plastic rubbish in the community to print what the community needed. Just amazing. We also know that Australians have huge empathy for those impacted by natural disasters and are very generous with their support. We know our multicultural nation means hundreds of thousands, millions of Australians have direct personal links. In fact, more than 50% of the Australian population have more direct personal links with the communities impacted in any crisis. And we know that new platforms enable them to supercharge those links when needed. We also know that, as would be the case in any nation, and is certainly the case in Australia and others, that the most vulnerable and excluded can be the hardest hit in humanitarian crisis and also can be taken backwards by decades. As I said, we see this in Australian disasters in relation to homeless, Indigenous, disabled, people who are excluded, people who are hidden. But we know these forces come from deep elements in society through inequality, religious beliefs, structural economic barriers. These are the factors that exist in every country, and the most deeply vulnerable are the ones hit. And we together, when we talk about as local as possible and international as necessary and complementarity, can help with those deep, deep social exclusions. We know that Mother Earth's systems are starting to collapse. We know that due to climate change and ecosystem destruction, she will respond. And Mother Earth is responding. Natural disasters are increasing in frequency and intensity. We see water scarcity, we see food scarcity. We know, as Hugo mentioned, the impact of climate change, but it's more than climate change. It is ecosystem destruction. What is going to happen when the watershed of the Hindu Kush stops flowing and 1.9 billion people are impacted? One statistic we used to like at WWF is that in the next 40 years, we together have to grow more food than we have in the last 8,000 years as a civilization. These are fundamental challenges that our humanitarian system needs to adapt to the adaptation, as you said, Hugo. Sheesh! What do we do? What does Little Australian Red Cross do in this context? We are making a fundamental shift to being locally led because we fundamentally believe that is the only path through these challenges. And we're being led by Peter Walton, who leads us in international, doing a tremendous job of the best humanitarian leadership I have seen. But it is challenging us very, very deeply. Who are we? What is our role? What can we take pride in? How can we sustain ourselves financially? Fundamental, deep-seated shifts and changes. So what have we done? The first is we said we're going local, so we're going to be led by those who are local. So we worked with our peers in the Pacific and others to share what we think does it mean. What does it really mean to be going local? What does it mean to be fit for purpose in our small part of the world that relates to being local? And it showed the most powerful shifts needed are not the logistics. They are about the deepest, most intangible, and they go to mindset, to culture, to behaviour, to systems. Because it's only by tackling these that we do unlock the multi-year resources, we do enable locally led decisions, we do privilege the voices of the communities who know and who have the ideas that just need to be amplified. It's also led to amazingly honest and quality discussions between our partners about who really is the most vulnerable. How do we together make sure that they are supported and come first? And how do we tackle the deep societal behaviours that exist as much in Australia as anywhere else? The second thing we did is, well, what's our value? Who are we in this context? What can we take pride in as Australian Red Cross? We have a great and trusted relationship with Australians. We have the ability to galvanise, mobilise knowledge, expertise, resources, short-term and long-term. We are part of an incredible global network of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement. We're able to galvanise and build partnerships and relationships, as Hugo was saying, to really leverage things like the emerging technologies. And we have a willingness to cede control and power. That's what we can bring. That's what we can be proud of looking into the future. It's very different from what we have been proud of. Not to take away what we've done that's great, but it's different. So the next question, where do we focus? Because we could do everything, right? So we focus on a major shift to what we call anticipatory action in consultation with our partners in the Pacific and to disaster risk reduction, longer-term partnerships, multi-year funding, and all of these things then start to get to tackling the core issues that we need to. We need to say to ourselves, what do we need to excel at? We need to excel at being the best possible partner, genuine peers and equal partners in working together on common outcomes. Being able in a partnership to be incredibly honest and objective together about what's needed to deliver the biggest humanitarian impact. Able to bring broader coalitions together, partnerships, technologies. Whenever I run into a university student and say, how's it going? They go, oh, this group work, God, it drives me crazy. I just wish I could just do the assignment. And in fact, that's what I did last night. I got all the input from the group. I'd stayed up all night, and here's the assignment. I thought, right, okay, good learnings. Coalitions and partnerships are difficult. It's about honesty, conversation, influence, and being able to influence others by being influenced yourself. All of these things. How do we help local ingenuity be scaled? So that was the tough stuff, still is the tough stuff, still working it through. But we have also fundamentally changed. We're shifting to multi-year core funding for our partners, 5-year funding that cannot be withdrawn no matter what happens to our financial situation. We and our board are taking the risk. 5-year core funding to deliver the support they need and to hire the amazing people that they want, to ensure that they can say, if you want to do amazing humanitarian work in my country, in Fiji, come to Fiji Red Cross because I can let you achieve your dreams in humanitarian action. And by that way, attracting the best possible talent that they have. We're also working on how do we leverage the best of global capability rather than duplicate it. So we'll be working fundamentally differently with our colleagues in the Federation and with the ICRC so that we're not duplicating what they do or they're not duplicating what we do. That's an interesting conversation. We're also getting serious about major flagship initiatives where we can bring the best of technology and research in Australia to what the local communities wish to amplify, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's data or big data, whether it's forecast-based financing, whatever the things that we can help bring and enable, whether it's the Bureau of Meteorology or CSIRO on climate, all of these sorts of things. And finally, we're working to push as hard as we can to shift the whole humanitarian system from our little place in Australia, whether it's with IFRC, whether it's with our colleagues at the International Committee of the Red Cross. So I'm going way over my 5 minutes, I'm sorry. For us, it is fundamentally shifting everything that we have done in a way that genuinely becomes locally led. It's incredibly challenging every day, literally. Peter and I have got, how do we deal with this one? How do we deal with that one? But the bottom line of us is we have to and want to be the best possible humanitarian partners in a world that is rapidly changing, and that's challenging everything about us. We're excited and we're terrified.
Thank you, Judy. And challenging yourself, I'm sure, but from the sounds of it, challenging others as well to reflect on the types of changes that you're talking about, which sound truly systemic. And 5 years of core funding, from an NGO perspective, sounds like a dream that doesn't happen very often. So if Australian Red Cross can do it, maybe others can as well. Degan, would you like to, if you stay there or up at the podium as you choose?
I'm happy to stay here.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Please.
Well, first of all, you can hear me, right? No. Okay. I'm very loud. I'm both a Somali and an American. Yes, it's on now. So I want to first say and acknowledge Judy's courage, because this is the first time in talking about localization, which I find also very pejorative and not a good word. This is the first time in 10 years I've heard an international actor do this kind of courageous systemic work that's required. So I really want to thank you and really appreciate you for leading the way. This is a woman of courage. This is a woman who's a leader.
A man of courage.
Both of you. So thank you for that. I have never heard that. I actually felt like I was in a room with development actors, civil society actors, and hearing someone speak from Ford Foundation. This is the kind of stuff that Ford is doing. This is not the kind of stuff you see in the humanitarian sector. So having said that, this is what complementarity looks like. I don't have to really sit here and give you an answer on what complementarity looks like, because she's demonstrated it, I think, in a very clear way. But I did have some notes that I will share with you, a few points. So last night, someone said that there was a a question: what is good about being an INGO or an international actor? And I think all of the things that I'm about to mention, Judy actually touched on. And there are things that we as local actors need the support of a really courageous and real partner who is standing from a position of integrity. And those things are the things that Judy talked about, such as technical assistance, whether it's AI or whether it's tech-based or whatever it may be. There's a lot of learning that's happening at a global level, at a global scale, that we don't have access to. Cross-learning. What happens in Fiji may benefit another location, may benefit Myanmar, may benefit me in Somalia. So that knowledge is held in a global actor. It's not held in my database in Somalia. The scale, again. The facilitation role, it really should be about facilitating what we need based on our needs. That to me is where locally led and being a really genuine partner is about. Being a facilitator of that knowledge, of that technical assistance, of that global scale and the cross-learning. And then another question that was asked, was it yesterday or the day before, about the liabilities, the legal stuff, those things. As I said, I'm not interested in an NGO in Somalia or in Fiji developing mammoth kind of machinery to handle that. If we can outsource that, if we can have the INGO handle that, that to me is actually a much better use of my time and resources. So those are all very, I think, valuable and just practical and tangible things that we believe a good INGO or international actor like a Red Cross can provide. The other thing I wanted to mention is, we need to have some really practical discussions about what it means for you as a CEO, what it means for you. I heard that Hugo asked about this. What does it mean for me on Monday morning at 9 a.m.? What do I have to do? So I think we need to figure out how is it that we operationalize the things that Judy has talked about and document that learning. I think you really need to be documenting this process and sharing it with your other colleagues, not just the Red Cross, but even INGOs. What does it mean for a project manager working with the Red Cross in Nepal? What does it mean for a community person? What does that look like as a government representative, someone working in the National Disaster Management Agency of that country and having to deal with the Red Cross? All of those things are things we need to map out. What are the practical steps in making this happen? And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that one of the things that NEAR has done is we've developed what we call a localization performance measurement framework, which is actually heavily borrowed from what HAG did, but we tried to make it simpler and more user-friendly. And it's something that ACF is actually now trying to get us to help them have their partners, their local partners, basically rate them on those 6 areas of capacity, partnerships, financing, all those things. How are they performing against these indicators? So these are very practical things for an NGO to actually assess themselves by saying to your local partner, or a local NGO challenging your INGO partner or your UN partner saying, I have these indicators in these 6 areas, and I'm going to assess you and monitor your performance on localization. So putting also the power in our hands, an agency in our hands to demand that. So this is just something I wanted to share with you. It's available on the NEAR website, which is, I think, near.ngo. And I'm happy to share with the conference organizers, and they can circulate it to people. I'm just going to end it there because I really want to spend more time hearing from everybody and being able to field your questions and even having a gentle discussion with Hugo.
Great. Thank you, Degan. And I certainly think the evaluation framework you mentioned is a fantastic example of cross-learning. This is discussions that had been going on for a long time that were actually turned into practice in Australia and the Pacific with local partners and local actors in the lead, and are now being interpreted and contextualized in different parts of the world to make sense there. I think this is a real example where the leadership is coming from the local organizations, the research institutes in Australia, not the ones in Geneva. The partners in the Pacific, not necessarily the partners in what you would expect to be the more traditional context where these issues are being fleshed out. So I think that's a real positive.
Yeah.
Hugo,
Piengo,
yes.
and Hag worked on that tool heavily, and then we came in and we just kind of shortened it and made it easier to use. That's all.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hugo, have you anything left to say on localization and complementarity after this morning? And if so, please.
I hope so, because what I'm going to do is actually try and talk about the ICRC's experience, if that's okay. And it will in no way match up to, in a sense, the standards of locally led humanitarian response that Judy and Degan are talking about. But I want to share it because after the World Humanitarian Summit, we came back and we thought hard about what this meant for us at the ICRC. And we began to sort of do an audit of what we were calling at that time our local footprint. And of course, we found that in many, many areas, we work very closely with national authorities, national institutions, national ministries, whatever, and local organizations. But it's hard, in a sense, to talk about that in the way you're talking about it here as being locally led and real localization, as it were. So I'm going to give you some examples, just 3 areas, and hopefully that'll give you food for thought. And it's also, in some ways, reflects that in some of the conflicts we work in, at certain moments of that conflict, there really is no alternative but complementarity of quite, sustained and deep type. If I think of we call these local partnerships, so we didn't really want to say we are local, like we're doing localization. We talked about local partnerships. And the first area we could look at would be on IHL. And I think if we look at how we've engaged over the last, goodness knows, 100 years or so, there are local structures that now exist, partly because of the way we partnered them earlier. I think there are sort of national IHL commissions and things that we have supported with complementarity. I think in some ways we can say that quite important university departments that are teaching IHL, that are promoting IHL, are national institutions now that we have worked with, sometimes sort of seeded, and now work with as partners in some ways. So that may be national partnerships of some kind. I also sometimes wonder about the military, because we've often done the same with militaries, and that's a very important national organization, where we have sort of got alongside for many, many years and tried to play a complementary role to the way that they take on, use, implement, and apply IHL. So I just put those out there for discussion as sort of IHL relevant local partnerships. But again, they are locally leading what they're doing, and we complement as possible. I think another interesting area, which I slightly mentioned in my talk, is around families of missing people. I think very often we, in our work, come across associations, small, very grassroots groups of, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives of missing people who are organizing themselves together in sort of family associations. And we don't usually start those. Those exist, and in a sense, we are locally led by their needs. And then we can be very, complementary, because our movement has the ability to reach out globally and look for missing people and search for them and try and trace them. At the same time, it's very clear to us that missing families have very specific needs that, from a complementary point of view, we can help them engage on. Often, women who have a partner or a husband missing, they lose all legal status because it sits with their husband, so they don't own the land, they don't have legal entitlement, sometimes they don't even have sort of identity in bureaucracies. And we can help those associations in some ways. So that's another area of complementarity, and it's another what we would call local partnership, and that's us not working with the military or whatever, but working with really self-formed CBOs to try and be complementary in some ways. Moving up the scale again, if I think of a lot of our work in urban warfare over the last 10, 15 years in places like Syria and Gaza, Yemen, Iraq, and now in Nigeria actually as well, and things like that, what we find is that local capacity is being destroyed. Okay? So it's being deliberately destroyed or destroyed. Lots of people from national authorities, water authorities, power generating authorities, sewage authorities, things are being destroyed, and those people who represent, the experts and workers in those facilities are often fleeing and moving away and becoming part of an IDP population. So again, what we find there, that we are working in local partnerships, national partnerships. We spend a lot of our time working on massive infrastructure across the Middle East to keep water continuity, electrical continuity, sewage continuity, health continuity. We work with local structures, and in a sense we're trying to stop them completely collapsing. So we're having to do complementary things like top up government salaries. For water authorities in many parts of the Middle East, because of our ability to negotiate with both sides, we can take water systems repair teams across the front lines of conflict. So that's a complementary role that we're able to say we can deliver. So I feel very often we're not really doing the kind of progressive being locally led that you're doing and stepping right back, because the levels of complementarity required in some of these situations of conflict are quite different. But I put those out there to say that we are often working very much in support of local structures, national structures. And these can be, I visited the other day, I visited a hospital in an opposition area. So the Ministry of Health had completely withdrawn from that area, but staff were still there. Now, the ICRC wants to support that structure. There is no other structure. We don't want to create a parallel one. So we work with who's still there to upgrade those facilities, and then we inevitably, with an absence of government payroll, end up topping up salaries and paying salaries and whatever. So it's not dream localization, dream locally led, but I think it is a real commitment to work with local authorities, national authorities, community-based organizations, and be as complementary as we can, when in some ways they're being destroyed.
Great.